Welcome back to another episode of The Political Life, and Happy New Year to everyone. We are off to a difficult start to 2022. The pandemic is spiking once again with a new variant. Good news is that it seems like this spike will be much quicker than past variants, and that it's much less deadly. So that is all good news. It's obviously not good news that we're dealing with this again and dealing with getting back to work, and more importantly with kids in school and dealing with that difficulty. So we are off to a rocky start in 2022, and we are going to play one of our favorite episodes from 2021, Jim Rogers, the finance investment guru. We had him on the show, and a lot of people commented how much they enjoyed it. And Jim warned us about all the spending that the government was doing, the money printing, the more money now, I think he called it, and his predictions or concerns about inflation. And so we thought we would play that again for you now because it turned out to be a good warning. And so that's what we're going to do to kick off the year. And then next week we will be back with Rich Gold from Holland and Knight in DC to get an overview of what is going on in Washington. We hope everyone is had a decent holiday and vacation and stayed healthy. Many people were hunkered down and had to change their travel plans. But if you did travel, hopefully you made it home. Hopefully made it home and made it home healthy and safely. So here is Jim Rogers. We hope you enjoy the episode again, and we hope you have a great week, and we will see you Monday with Rich Gold from Washington, D.C. Our guest today, all the way from Singapore, is Jim Rogers. Jim, we are so happy to have you here today and to help educate our audience on the current state of government policy and markets. Welcome to the show.
Jim, I am delighted to be here, and the current state of governments and markets, disaster.
A lot of money printing going on around the world. And the strange thing is there was some talk about it when they were doing it, and now it seems to have quieted down. But you look at all the money printing going on, and it just seems like, how is this going to work? What are your thoughts?
Jim, I will tell you, it is a good time to be old in most countries, certainly in America, because I'm not going to have to pay for all of this. But my children, I have young children, my gosh, what they are going to have to deal with in their lifetimes, and all young Americans, it's going to be a massacre. You know, 100 years ago, Britain was the richest, most powerful country in the world. There was no number two 100 years ago. And then they went this path, and 50 years later, only 50 years later, they were bankrupt, literally bankrupt. IMF had to fly into London airport and bail them out. So they went from unchallenged number one to pure bankruptcy in only 50 years. So this is... It's good to be old, as I said. It's not good to be young.
And so the current debt in the U.S. is over, the actual known debt is $20 trillion, and the unfunded liabilities are upwards of, I don't know, 200 trillion I've read reports about. Is there any way for the U.S. to get out of this?
You've answered the question, Jim. Is there any way? No, there's no way. Not any way. I mean, what normally happens is, this is not the first time this has happened in history. It's happened often, unfortunately. And people printed, the money becomes worthless. They default and just say, we're not going to pay you. They go to war. Then they destroy their money, their economy by war. There are many ways that history has resolved it. But none of them are any fun. None of them are something you say, oh, this one, let's do this one. No, they all wind up being tragedy for most people.
And so history tells us that at some point, the U.S. is going to lose its position as the reserve currency of the world.
Well, Jim, no reserve currency or medium of exchange, international medium of exchange, has lasted more than 100, 150 years. This is not the first time a country's done it. You know, the British, the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, lots of countries have had their currency as the world's medium of exchange. None of them lasted more than 100, 150 years. We have been on top for several decades, as you know. There are already many countries starting to look for an alternative for political reasons. You know, the way the world's international medium of exchange is supposed to work, it's neutral. You use it anywhere by anybody. Well, if Washington gets angry at you, though, they put sanctions on you and say you cannot use the US dollar. Well, that's all the rest of the people in the world say, wait a minute, that's not the way it's supposed to work. So now they are starting to look for something to compete with the US dollar. India, China, Russia, Brazil, Iran, many people, for political reasons, because they realize the world cannot function this way. And then for economic reasons, I mean, America is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. Jim, I don't like saying that. I'm an American. My children are Americans. But we have to deal with facts. America is the largest debtor nation in world history, and the debts go up every day, every hour. So for political and economic reasons, people are now looking for something to compete with the US dollar. History shows it's going to come to an end sometimes in the foreseeable future. It's never happened that someone has lasted forever. Be worried.
And so do you see, is it one country like China becoming the new reserve currency, or do you see some countries coming together? How do you see that? Or is it crypto? We hear a lot about crypto.
I know we hear a lot about crypto, which probably means it's finished. It's almost finished. It could be, I mean, if I look out the window, the only countries I can see that conceivably compete with the dollar right now is the Chinese currency. It's big enough. They're not a huge debtor like most of the rest of the world. They've got a gigantic economy, the second largest in the world, et cetera. What's happening now, though, people are looking for what we call it, a combination of a currency, if you will, an artificial currency. It could be the Chinese currency. It's the obvious choice, but it's not even convertible right now, so it's impossible. But what they are all talking about, I told you Russia, India, et cetera, they're talking about some kind of medium of exchange which they would use, which they would create, it would be used. Or maybe they would just select one of theirs, and if they did, it would be the Chinese currency. They'd have to make it convertible first. But they could use silver, they could use gold, they could use wheat, they could use anything they want. But historically, they would wind up probably not using gold or silver, probably using another currency.
Okay. Well, if those three countries got together, that would be quite a shift.
Jim, Washington is pushing China and Russia together every day. I mean, I sit here and say, don't these guys know what they're doing? But they're pushing the Chinese and the Russians closer and closer together, and other countries as well, with their actions.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. How are the current state of affairs with trade and everything else between the U.S. and China?
Well, the U.S. and China, the trade is gigantic, but Washington keeps, saying you're bad people and we don't like you anymore. Even though for 30 or 40 years, China and America traded huge amounts. Go to Walmart or just about anywhere and you will see, and both benefited enormously. But now Mr. Trump started saying, you're terrible people. Jim, throughout history, when a country has problems, the politicians have always blamed foreigners. It's easy to blame foreigners. They have different languages, different skin, different religion, different everything, And so Mr. Trump started doing the same thing, blaming the foreigners, and the Democrats said, oh, we're going to do it too. We're going to blame the Chinese so we can win the next election. Chinese showed admirable restraint, but the Chinese got into it as well. And Chinese say nothing like what Washington is doing, but the Chinese have thrown out a few barbs themselves. This is I look back at history and I say, I wonder what it was like in the early 20th century. The Germans and the English were very close friends. The royal families vacationed together, etc. But somebody somewhere started planning newspaper articles. In 1914, they were slaughtering each other. And by the way, in 1915, they all said, wait a minute, how'd this happen? This is crazy. How do we get out of this? How do we get out of this war? But it was too late, of course. And I was just thinking, but the other day, I wonder what the news articles in the 30s were like, or the early 20th century. Before these wars started, somebody had to be saying something bad about the other people. And unfortunately, I see the same thing is starting to happen now. The worst lesson of history, Jim, is most people don't learn the lessons of history. All this has happened before. You and I are not the first people to be sitting and talking about things like this. Been going on for centuries. Unfortunately, you and I are Americans, and we're going to be in it, which doesn't sound like fun.
It is amazing how we so quickly forget the lessons of the past. You have said in the past that pick any time in history and go 15 years forward. And when you do that, and I've done it, you literally can say that there's no way that anybody in 1930 or 1928 could have predicted what the world would look like 15 years forward, the world wars, the depression, and do it at any point in time. And it's a great trick, a great framework to teach you that none of us have any idea what the world is going to look like in 10 or 15 years. And it concerns me.
I assure you that whatever's happening in 1936 is not on our lips right now. It's going to be an entirely different world. I wish I knew. Even if I told you I knew, you shouldn't believe me because who knows? It's going to be so different in 15 years. But it's not a trick. It's all, you said framework, that's a better word. It's always happened that way. Yes. I mean, I'm not trying to make tricks or anything. I'm just saying this is the way the world works, the way the world has always worked, and it's going to work this way again, unfortunately.
You recently went to Russia, I believe. How was that?
Well, there's something called the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which for simplest is like Davos. It's the Russian version of Davos. The Chinese have one too. Theirs is usually in April. And Mr. Putin puts a lot of money and effort into it. He gets all sorts of world leaders to come. It's always amazing. He's had American TV stars, TV broadcasters come and, be the moderators. I mean, I don't know how he does it, but he's got some remarkable people to come. And I mainly went because I wanted to see, well, is Russia open? What's happening in Russia? It's a major country, a major player. And there were hundreds of people there, thousands of people there. And Russia completely open. The bars, the restaurants, the hotels, everything. I mean, you wouldn't know. Nobody's wearing a mask. You wouldn't know there's a virus going on. So that's the main reason I went. I didn't particularly learn much, but that was an important thing to learn. I assure you, it's important to learn.
And now you're back in Singapore. How are things in Singapore, and how has it been? You've been living there for, I guess, maybe 20 years or so?
No, 14 years. 14 years. 2007, we came here permanently.
Okay.
Well, Singapore seems to be more closed than most countries in the world. You can go to a restaurant, but only 2 people can go to a restaurant. Many things, if you travel and you come back, you have to be quarantined, etc. From what I can read, Singapore is more stringent than most other countries in the world. But you can go out and about. I mean, I could go over to the grocery store if I wanted to with no problem. I could go to a restaurant tonight if I wanted to with no problems, etc. If I had guests come to my house, I could have no more than 5 come to my house. And, Singapore is, they're pretty strict. They I don't know how they monitor, but they seem to monitor more than most countries what's going on. I was in England recently, which supposedly you're supposed to quarantine. Nobody cared. Nobody checked anything. As I said, in Russia, if they were supposed to quarantine, nobody knew it, and nobody was doing it. And everything, the restaurants were open, parties were going on. It was great fun.
And how have you enjoyed living in Singapore?
Well, I came here because I wanted to make sure my children knew Asia and knew Mandarin and spoke good Chinese, because in their lifetimes, that's going to be extremely important. And it's worked. I mean, Singapore is a great place. It's an extremely successful country over the past 40 or 50 years. Everything works. Great education, great healthcare, great airport, great everything. So, no, we're all very, very pleased. And my children speak great Mandarin now.
I hear the schools are phenomenal, very, very difficult.
Well, all the things you may have read or heard about Asian education are true. I can tell you they're demanding, advanced, rigorous. My girls had more homework in 2 or 3 years than I had in 12 years in the United States. No, it is very rigorous and demanding. Fortunately, my girls have adapted and are doing fine, doing well. But if they weren't, I'd pull them out. But no, I don't know why. But they just think this is normal. I know it's not normal, but they're happy with it. But yeah, you're perfectly right about Singapore education. When they give the international test, Singapore is always in the top 2 or 3 countries around the world. The others are China, Japan, Korea, Asian countries. All these countries really, really, really make their kids work in school.
Well, that's wonderful. And so getting back, so we have all this money printing going on. We're starting to see inflation. Do you anticipate inflation continuing to get worse?
Well, it always has throughout history when governments, central banks print a lot of money. And this time it's on an unprecedented scale. Nobody's ever printed this much. And we also have nearly all countries printing this much money. History shows it always leads to inflation. I mean, central bankers and the politicians in Washington say, no, don't worry. It's not going to happen. Well, okay. They all went to Ivy League schools. If you believe them, then you shouldn't believe history. But history would indicate that it always leads to inflation. Inflation is coming back. If you do any shopping for education, anything, entertainment, that inflation is coming back.
And then we hear, the debate between inflation and deflation. Does it matter?
Well, it certainly matters if you want to survive economically. One would think we would have inflation first, and then they would do something to kill it, and that would lead to deflation. But if history works the way it normally does, it's going to be a while before the deflation comes. I mean, no inflation goes straight up. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's probably what's going to happen this time too. And by the way, when we have a lull, when things calm down, Washington's going to say, see, we told you. We knew what we were talking about until the next time it goes up, and they won't mention anything then.
And so for everyone, most people are managing their own retirement accounts or have to oversee them. So for all the personal investors out there, how do you prepare for the coming inflation and potentially bear markets that we're going to be facing?
Well, Washington says we're not going to have any more bear markets.
Right. So we don't need to worry about it. Next question.
Just because they've been going on for thousands of years periodically. But in case, well, first of all, you should only invest in what you know about. You shouldn't listen to some guy on the internet, maybe Jim O'Brien, but you certainly shouldn't listen to most people on the internet. If you want to survive it, you invest only in what you know. Everybody knows a lot about something, whether it's fashion or cars or something. If you don't know anything to invest in, don't invest. Just put your money in the bank and wait. Or maybe, I'll tell you some things I'm doing, but that doesn't mean you should do them. I own silver. I own gold. I'm buying, inflation by definition is when the price of things go up. Wheat, oil, copper, stuff, the prices go higher and then you have to pay for it because you're a consumer. So if you buy the commodities, and I'm buying ETFs on the New York Stock Exchange, commodity ETFs, investment products on the stock exchange, because it's simple. Because if the price of cotton and wheat and oil and copper goes up, well, that's what I own, and so I will make money or certainly stay ahead of the game by owning the prices of real things, including silver.
For our listeners out there, Jim is holding up an actual silver coin. Where is that silver coin from?
Well, what do you want to see? I've got U.S., I've got Canada,
You've got everything covered.
England, China. What do you want?
And there's a few commodities. I did read before we did this interview that sugar and oil and maybe a few others are way down.
Well, silver's down 50% from its all-time high. Sugar's down 70% from its all-time high. Oil is down 50%. I mean, most things in the world are going through the roof because of inflation. Property, stocks, bonds are all probably in bubbles. But something that's down 70% from its all-time high is not a bubble. It's pretty depressed. So I prefer to buy things that are down, where I think I see changes coming, rather than things that are making all-time highs.
Now, Jim, you grew up in a small town in Alabama and made your way to the Ivy League, to Yale College.
Yep.
What was that change like? And how did you enjoy Yale? And then I think you went on to Oxford.
I did go on when I was bad-mouthing Ivy Leaguers before. I should have. I wish you hadn't brought it up. Anyway, I did. I grew up in a very small town in the backwoods of Alabama. My phone number was 5, and that's not a typo. That was my phone number, 15. So it was a small town. Yale was a shock. I was in over my head, way in over my head, but I couldn't go home because I've been bragging that I was going to Yale. So I had to work very, very hard to survive, which I did. I had a wonderful time. I loved it. I loved Yale. I loved Oxford. Had a wonderful time at Oxford too. And then I came back, and in the interim, I had discovered Wall Street and fallen in love with Wall Street because they would pay me to know what was going on in the world. Before that, Jim, I was going to go to law school, business school, medical school. I mean, I was a confused college kid, like many of them are. But fortunately, I stumbled onto Wall Street and fell in love and didn't go to law school, medical school, or business school. I went to Wall Street as soon as I could. I went to the Army first, but after the Army, I went to Wall Street, had a wonderful time.
What did you study at Yale?
History. I majored in history at Yale, and at Oxford, I studied philosophy, politics, and economics. So I'm well-rounded. I don't know anything, but I have well-rounded education.
For a history major to do so well on Wall Street, is that what you recommend to young people today?
Well, I will tell you that studying history helped me a lot. Some of the things that I told you before, that in 15 years, it's all going to be different. That's one of the things you will learn if you study history. And that is important in investing, because if you can know that things are going to change and you can figure out the change, that's how you get very rich. That's how you make a lot of money. We're all sitting there on Wall Street thinking, well, the sky is blue and it's always going to be blue. But then if somebody says, no, wait a minute, Memorex is going to go down, you should buy Microsoft, instead, then you might make a lot of money if you realize that things are going to change. I mean, I am very glad I majored in history. First of all, I loved it, still do, but it also prepared me very well for what was coming.
Very interesting. Very good point. So wait, Jim, if your number is 5, how do you call home?
Very clever. Well, in those days, my parents couldn't afford to take me to New Haven, so I had to call home on Sunday because it was cheaper in those days to call home to use a long distance call. So I got the New Haven operator on the phone, and I said, "Well, I want to call Demopolis, Alabama, and the phone number is 5." And she said, 5 what? I said, just 5. She said, "You mean all 5s?" I said, "No, operator, it's just 1 5. And she said, "Well, are you a college boy?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I don't think this is funny, college boy. This is not my idea of a joke." And I said, "Please, operator, it's Sunday. I have to call my parents and tell them I made it to the north, okay?" So she got the New York operator, got the Atlanta operator, got the Birmingham operator, and then the Demopolis operator. And the New Haven operator said, Well, we have somebody on the phone who says he wants to call Demopolis, Alabama, and the phone number is 5. Well, the Demopolis operator never missed a beat. She said, oh, they're at church now. You have to call later. And the New Haven operator, of course, you could hear her, said, after a pause, she said, what's wrong with you, college boy? Why are you calling your parents when they're at church? You should know that they're at church now. So I had to call back later. No, that's the way it was. There was no dial. They have dials in the town now.
Right.
No, there were no dials in those days. It was just
that's such a great story. That is such a great story. So is the fact that you grew up in a small town and studied history, is that what separated you from the pack on Wall Street? I mean, you had a wildly successful career. You still have. And how did you separate yourself from the pack?
Well, that's a good question. I would say we worked harder. I never thought I was working. I was just having so much fun. They wouldn't have had to pay. I mean, they had to pay me because I didn't have any money, but I would have done it for free if I could have afforded it. It was so much fun. We loved it. We worked at it. We certainly in those days were investing all over the world, and it's hard for you to understand. But in those days, most people only invested on the New York Stock Exchange. They really didn't even know about London, much less Tokyo or places like that. Yet we were investing all over the world in bonds, in commodities, in currencies, in stocks. We were selling short. We were doing everything because we both loved it, and it seemed to work. We used a lot of leverage. We borrowed a lot of money because it helps you. I mean, it makes you go bankrupt very quickly if you borrow a lot of money and you get it wrong. But fortunately, we got it right.
Well, I think the key, at least for me, is the fact that you said you loved it. And a little secret, you would have done it for free. You loved it so much. We saw Bruce Springsteen at his Broadway show, and he said, I'll tell you all a little secret. He said, the only thing I love doing, and I would have done it for free, you didn't have to pay me all this money.
Well, I understand that perfectly. I felt the same way when I went to Wall Street.
And you traveled around the world, drove around the world with your now wife, Paige. And it's an incredible journey. So what surprised you? You obviously had a sense of adventure that you wanted to do this. You did it, which is really incredible. What surprised you about the trip?
Well, I'd always wanted adventure. One reason I retired early was because I didn't want to wake up when I was 80 years old, still in front of a computer on Wall Street. I wanted adventure. I first wanted to go around the world on a motorcycle. It was difficult in those days. You remember Red China? Remember the Soviet Union? Those, that was impossible. Finally, I got permission, and I did go around the world on my motorcycle. It was fabulous, but it wasn't enough. It was only 2 years, so I wanted to do it again. And so next time I did it with, she's now my wife, Paige Parker, and we did it in a special convertible, 3 years this time. And it was fabulous. I mean, I love the adventure, but I love the excitement of knowing, Jim, when I was in New York, if I walked out the front door, whether I went left or right or straight ahead, I more or less knew what was going to happen to me. I'd been in New York. I knew. When you're going around the world, you have absolutely no idea. You might not even be alive in 5 minutes or 5 miles because everything is new and exciting and it's adventure. And that's what I wanted. And that's why I did it twice and would love to do it again. When my kids get older, maybe we'll do it again.
So when you got back from your first trip, one of your first thoughts was the trip was not long enough?
Yeah. It was 2 years around the world, Guinness Book of Records for what that's worth. But I remember thinking, oh, God. See, and the woman I was with, my girlfriend at that time, really, she was great in the end, and she loved it, but it was not her passion like it was for me. I mean, I'd been wanting to do it all my life. And so I kept thinking, boy, I really should do this again and do it more and take longer. And maybe I'll do it in a car since I've already done it on a motorcycle. And I mean, I was sitting there thinking, and then I realized, the turn of the millennium is coming. Nobody's ever been around the world at the turn of the millennium. If they did, they didn't put it on the internet. So I started thinking, well, maybe I should do it again. And lo and behold, I did it.
And where were you on 9/11?
On 9/11 was in Peru. We were having breakfast, and the owner of the hotel came running in and said, oh, my God, I'm so sorry. Well, I thought somebody smashed up my car or something. I had no idea. And we said, what are you talking about? And he said, you don't know? So he took us down to his office and showed us the TV. And as you can imagine, we were as shocked as everybody else.
Wow. Well, they say that people have a need or a want for certainty and uncertainty. You clearly have the need for a higher amount of uncertainty and enjoy that in your life. That's incredible.
Well, uncertain adventure, I'd use the term adventure, but you're right. Adventure is uncertain. It's not an adventure if it's certain, if you have a lot of certainty, that's for sure. So no, I just wanted the adventure. I wanted to see the world. I guess if you grow up in a town where your phone number is 5, you either never leave, which is fine, or you want to see a lot more. And I wanted to see a lot more.
Well, it's incredible because most people who end up on Wall Street in that position that you were in don't do, obviously, what you did. I think it's a great life lesson.
Well, there's no question you're right about that. And I can remember when I would tell people I'm going to go around the world on a motorcycle, they would look at me like, are you nuts? Why don't you just fly around the world? What are you talking about? You're going to get killed. And they were right. I could have gotten killed, but at least I was going to die. I was going to die happy, and most of I know many people dream about or talk about things like this. Very few of them do it. Very few of them succeed. But I mean, Jim, it's what I wanted to do. I can remember when I was a teenager in the small town saying, gosh, someday I want to see the world. I didn't quite realize I was going to go around the world on a motorcycle or in a special car, but I did it.
Yeah, but Jim, I have something to tell you. I think a lot of kids have that dream or that thought to travel around the world. Very few actually do it. And very few walk away from an incredibly successful career where, obviously you had enough money. But if you stayed on Wall Street, you're making more money, and more is always better, as you know. And you walked away from it and pursued that dream that we've all had, but very few pursue.
Well, to repeat, Jim, I wanted the adventure all my life. I wanted excitement, adventure, new things, etc. And as I say, I know I could have stayed, and I'd probably still be there. But that was not the way I wanted to spend my life. I wanted to know other things. I mean, money's great to have. All I wanted was to buy my freedom. Well, I got enough to buy my freedom so that I could do what I wanted to. And one of the things I wanted to do was to see the world from the ground up. And I did it.
And you did. And you also became an author. How did that first happen? Have that idea like, I think I'm going to write a book.
Never happened. The first night I was back, I was at a dinner in New York, and the guy sitting next to me, he was editor-in-chief of a major magazine. He said, oh, Jim, I haven't seen you in a while. Where you been? I said, I just got back today from going around the world on my motorcycle. And he asked me a couple of more questions. He said, don't tell anybody. I want the story. And so he sent a reporter over. We did a long story, and it went on for hours. It was, to me, interesting, and I guess to them. They did a long story in the magazine. It was Fortune magazine, so if you want to know. And we had so many notes. It was transcribed. And so I edited that, edited, and turned it into a book. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a plan. It was just because I happened to be at a dinner. And the guy said, where have you been? And I explained where I had been.
And you said editing. Is writing a book, was it a difficult process?
No, because the way it happened, this reporter, he kept asking me questions. I kept telling story after story after story after story, because it just, went on and on and on and on. And it was transcribed. And I basically told the story. I remember somebody right after it first came out said, gosh, your book sounds like the way you talk. Well, that's what it was. I mean, I just told the story, dictated it, and then we edited that down, those transcripts, hundreds of pages, down into a book. And that basically is, I guess I talk a better game than I write. And that's how the book came about.
Well, Jim, this has been great. We very much appreciate you taking the time. We have a lot of words of wisdom. One is to major in something like history or philosophy. 2, don't call home on Sunday, at least while they're at church. 3, don't listen to the politicians, listen to your gut. And history is a great teacher of the future. And hopefully we will all pay attention. So thank you so much.
You certainly don't listen to politicians and bureaucrats, but don't listen to anybody, Jim. Yes, listen to your gut, as you put it. Listen to what you know. Stay with what you, if I told you you can only invest in 20 things in your life, you'd be very careful. You wouldn't be jumping in and out and hopping on hot tips. Everybody wants a hot tip. Everybody wants to be rich this week, including me. I want to be rich this week too. But hot tips will ruin you, absolutely ruin you. So if you can only invest in 20 things in your life, you would be careful. You would think about it. You would wait till you knew. You'd wait till you saw money sitting over there on the floor in the corner. See that corner over there? Oh my gosh, there's money sitting there. And you would just go over and pick it up because you knew it was right. And that's the way to just be very careful, and you will survive all of this and you will make a lot of money. Many people came out of the 1930s, the Depression, rich. Most didn't, most did not, but it could happen. So be careful. Be worried. Be very worried. If you get worried, you'll start doing your research and you'll get some knowledge, and then you'll be very successful.
Well, Jim, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for going on. We will have to do it again when events demand it. And hopefully someday we will do this live from Singapore. That would be wonderful. And we appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom on life and on markets and currencies. And so for our listeners out there, remember you can follow us on social media, on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. You can also sign up for our email, which comes out with the show on Mondays. And you can do that at thepoliticallife.net, our website. You can sign up and it comes out every Monday. We don't bother you with a lot of things. It just comes out Monday. And that's it. So we hope you have a great week. We wish we were coming to you live from Singapore, but maybe next time, Jim, we'll do it live from Singapore. And anyways, we hope everyone has a great week, and we will see you next Monday.